Welcome, everyone. I'm Heather Shea Gasser, Director of the University of Idaho Women's Center, and I am so pleased to see so many of you in the audience tonight. I'm thrilled that you are joining us to listen to one of the most renowned leaders of the feminist movement, Gloria Steinem. Ms. Steinem's presence serves as the keynote speech for the Women's Leadership Conference and highlights our semester-long celebration for the 40th anniversary of the Women's Center. Woo. During tonight's lecture, I ask that you please silence your cell phones. And in addition, after tonight's talk, there will be time for questions and answers, which I will help moderate. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Debbie Storrs, who will acknowledge the support of the many people and groups who made tonight's event possible.
Good evening, everybody. It's so thrilling to see so many people here, and such an honor to be here with Gloria Steinem. I serve as co-president of Athena, the professional association of staff and faculty dedicated to gender equitable and an inclusive workplace. I share Heather's enthusiasm for tonight's guest, and I warmly welcome you. I'm awed about your presence here. I would like to spend a few moments just acknowledging the support of the many units and individuals who made tonight's event possible. First, thank you to President Dwayne Nellis for his support of both the Women's Leadership Conference and Ms. Steinem's visit. His support is another illustration of his commitment to diversity and creating an inclusive and equitable learning and work environment. I'd also like to recognize members of two separate planning committees, the Women's Leadership Conference Planning Committee and the Women's Center 40th Anniversary Planning Committee. Members of these committees worked tirelessly for almost a year to coordinate a series of events and activities, including the conference today and tonight's event. Their invisible labor behind the scenes work was significant, and we thank you for your work. I'm really pleased that every college at the University of Idaho and many individual departments contributed to tonight's program. They are listed on your program for tonight. I'd also like to thank the Vice Provost for Student Affairs, Dean of Students Office, the Women's Center, Athena's Women's Organization, the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Community, University Housing and Residence Life, the Office of Human Rights, Access, and Inclusion, ASUI Vandal Entertainment Board, the University of Idaho Library, and the Idaho Commons and Student Union, all who contributed to tonight's event. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to recognize our collaboration with and support from colleagues and offices from Washington State University. These include the WSU Women's Resource Center, WSU Commission on the Status of Women, WSU Advance, and colleagues from WSU who served on the Women's Leadership Conference Planning Committee. They were important collaborators and donors. Thank you. Many individuals also donated to this event, and they are also listed on your program. I think it's amazing that there's such a long list of donors. It reveals our shared commitment, a strong community, all united in our efforts to achieve gender equity. Thank you again for your support.
Undergraduate student Whitney Chapman will be introducing Ms. Steinem. Whitney is a senior majoring in psychology with a minor in women's studies and in American Indian studies. She is also pursuing the Certificate for Diversity and Stratification. Whitney was invited to introduce Ms. Steinem because of her commitment to equity, inclusivity, and her activism on campus and in the community. She has held various student leadership roles, has interned in the Women's Center for several years, is a former member of the feminist organization on campus, the feminist-led activist movement to empower, or FLAME, and currently works for University Housing as an apartment community assistant. Thank you, Whitney, for your leadership and for helping improve our learning and working environment.
Hello, everyone. As Heather said, I'm Whitney. I am a little nervous, but mostly excited to stand here before you tonight to introduce our keynote speaker, a person whom I have long considered a role model and an inspiration. It's activists like Gloria Steinem who have made it possible for me to stand here before you now. It's activists like Gloria who looked adversity and injustice in the face and dared for something more. It's activists like Gloria who rattled the cage the status quo built and created a better world for generations to come. Gloria, I'd really like to say thank you, but thank yous really only go so far. I could never give back what you have already given to me, so I live my life in feminist action, hoping I too can make this world a better place. Thank you. I'd now like to share with you a little bit about Gloria. Gloria Steinem is a writer, lecturer, editor, and feminist activist. Over the past 40 years, Steinem has played a pivotal role in the women's equality movement in the United States and internationally. Steinem is the founder of the Ms. Foundation for Women, the National Women's Political Caucus, and the Coalition of Labor Union Women. In 1993, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York. Because of her tireless work writing, speaking, and acting against sexism and racism, historian Miriam Schneer has said Gloria Steinem is to the second wave of American feminism as Susan B. Anthony was to the first. Her work with feminism, with the feminist movement, has also been equated to Martin Luther King Jr.'s work in the civil rights movement. Ms. Steinem graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith College in 1956, and then spent 2 years in India on a Chester Bowles Fellowship. She wrote for an Indian publications and was influenced by Gandhian activism. She received the first Doctorate of Human Justice awarded by Simmons College, the Bill of Rights Award from the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, the National Gay Rights Advocate Award, the Liberty Award of the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Ceres Medal from the United Nations, and a number of honorary degrees. Parenting magazine selected her for its Lifetime Achievement Award in 1995 for her work in promoting girls' self-esteem, and Biography magazine listed her as one of the 25 most influential women in America. In 1972, the same year that the University of Idaho established its Women's Center, Steinem co-founded Ms. Magazine and remained one of its editors for 15 years. She continues to serve as a consulting editor for Ms. and was instrumental in orchestrating the magazine's move to publication by the Feminist Majority Foundation. Her books include bestsellers Revolution from Within, a book of self-esteem, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions, Moving Beyond Words, and Marilyn, Norma Jean on the Life of Marilyn Monroe. Her writings also appear in many anthologies and textbooks, and she was an editor of Houghton Mifflin's The Reader's Companion to U.S. Women's History. For those of you who are interested, several of these books are available for purchase at the Vandal store on the upper concourse. Steinem lives in New York City and is currently working on Road to the Heart, America as If Everyone Mattered, which is a book about her more than 30 years on the road as a feminist organizer. It is my honor and privilege to welcome to the stage Gloria Steinem.
How great is it to be introduced by the future? I thank Whitney so much, and you should know that she is thinking of becoming a lawyer, and therefore I'm hoping that she gets me out of jail if I need. I've been looking forward to coming to this campus. I have spoken with other people who have visited here, who have all told, well, these two campuses really, who have all told me what a wonderful, down-to-earth, shit-free group of folks are here, right? That so I just hope you all know each other. Look at how many of you are here. You have to promise me that before you leave this giant space, you will look around and see 3 or 4 people you don't know. Introduce yourselves. If you came here this evening, I'm sure you share interests and values. You can leave here with a new friend, a new revolutionary colleague, a new job, a new love affair. Who knows what could happen? Because I so understand that I am kind of an excuse for you to come together and discover you didn't need an outside agitator in the first place. You have all the energy and subversive ideas and hopes and dreams that you need right here. I'm glad that this event here we share together is so well timed. The voter registration deadline is October 12th. This is Domestic Violence Month. Very important that we think about that and understand that it probably should be called original violence because it is the root and the normalization of all other violence in the street, in foreign policy, everywhere. National Coming Out Day is October 11th. I was trying to think how I could support National Coming Out Day, and I thought, well, it's, you know, I need to tell the truth, so I can't exactly come out in the way that that day means, so I thought I'd come out as a 78-year-old. Telling our ages is a sort of form of coming out, right? I mean, we've been lying so long, who would know what age looks like? And when we discover it, and also I think it's very important that when we're younger, we understand that with luck and care, we will be able to have a very long life. Because I see now that there are so many young women and young men, too, who think they have to know everything and be successful by 30. No. All kinds of surprises are in front of you. It's Transgender Awareness Week. And you know, it is so interesting to me that also part of this week's events is that you're having Mad Men. You're having Mad Men Mondays. If you want to know anything about that era, just ask me. I lived through it. And I hope that during our question and answer time, you will feel very free to bring up whatever you are experiencing or whatever you want this group to know. You don't have to ask questions. You can make announcements of any upcoming troublemaking meetings you think this group should know about. And I hope that together we can overcome this distance, right? Because we should be sitting in a circle. And we can overcome the fact that you're looking at each other's backs and I'm looking at you. This is a hierarchical structure. Hierarchy is based on patriarchy. Patriarchy doesn't work anywhere anymore. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion time because that's when I get to learn something. Now, I've been having a dilemma because I've been talking with great students and faculty members and activists all day long, and that means that I've changed my notes about 100 times. And actually, I figured out that I had ended up with 10 speeches, not just one speech. So I have just decided to, with no apologies to David Letterman whatsoever, to do 10 speeches, the 10 top speeches that I was going to give, 10 through 1, right? And on each one, I'm going to try to honor the 40th anniversary of the Women's Center and the 40th anniversary of Ms. Magazine, lots of 40th anniversaries, by symbolizing the past and the present, but only for the purpose of taking that distance, that we have come in 40 years to now, and then projecting that into the future and saying that's how far we're going to go in the future. Because we need to remember in this age of Twitter that social justice movements really have historically needed to last at least a century to be fully absorbed into cultures and to become irreversible. It was true of the suffrage and abolitionist movement. It's true of all of our social justice and environmental movements now. So we need to overcome the current form that the backlash so often takes, which is to say, well, it used to be necessary, but it's not anymore, right? Oh, well, we have an African-American family in the White House, so the civil rights movement is over. Excuse me? We've come a little distance in terms of gender equality and humanizing gender roles, but we have so much more to go, and our dreams need to be big. So number 10 here is I'm just offering you mine, and then you think of yours, because I think number 10 is sort of whatever has just happened in your life. Okay, in my terms, I just got off a plane, several planes, actually. And that made me think about the years, in fact, 40 years that I've been traveling in this country, as mirrored by my relationships with stewardesses or flight attendants. Now, 40 years ago, first of all, the word was stewardess, because they were 100% female. They had to quit when they were something between 26 and 30. They had to quit if they got married, because the people who were on planes were overwhelmingly businessmen, and so the idea was that this was a waitress and a sort of geisha person, even though she had to know escape procedures for 26 airlines, 26 kinds of, she was always a very skilled person, but she was regulated right down to what shade of lipstick she wore, and they often had to wear buttons that said things like, "I'm Linda, fly me." There was one airlines that actually had an airstrip that made the flight attendants walk up and down the aisle stripping down to hot pants. You can't make this stuff up, So I think the fact that I began to see a rebellion, about 10 years into my travels, I would notice that they had made their own buttons that said, "I'm Linda, fly yourself." And one flight attendant said to me as we were leaving St. Louis, which is where Phyllis Schlafly comes from, she whispered to me and she said, "Phyllis Schlafly was on my flight. I put her in a middle seat." And flight attendants, they organized as stewardesses, began to call themselves flight attendants because they well understood that unless men were integrated into this working population, it would never be properly paid. And also, if women were going to become pilots, which very few have, but some have, then, the point was to say flight attendants, not just stewardesses. But it's still true. Now we have to think, okay, that's how far we've come, right? Okay, now we have to think about the future. Well, pilots still earn about 400% more than flight attendants. And it's still extremely difficult for a woman to become a pilot because the pilots are trained by the military, and really since World War II there haven't been hardly any women pilots, or very few women pilots trained by the military. And I think also that their profession, a mostly female profession, is symbolic of the pink-collar ghetto that we need to change. All the professions that are mostly female and therefore are composed of the jobs you can't outsource. You know what I mean? Because they're service jobs right here. You have to be here, you know, to be a flight attendant, food service, and so on. So I think that I was trying to think of what's the future of this? Okay, I think we can begin to think this way right now. It's understanding that the simplest thing, like equal pay for equal work, is the greatest economic stimulus this country could possibly have. What it would really mean is $200 billion more a year directly into the economy. For white women, it would mean something like $150 more a week on the average if they were paid equally to white men. If women of color were paid equally for the same work as white men, it would be something like $250 or $350 a week. Imagine. And this money would be injected into the economy at the exact place where it's going to be spent. Those women are going to spend it. They have to spend it. They're not going to buy stock with it, invest in some other country, send it off to Bermuda or wherever the illegal banks are. No, they're going to invest it. So that's one example, I think, if we've come from here to here and what it symbolizes in going forward. Then I was thinking about Title IX, which of course has been so crucial and so important to us. And we have come to understand that education could and should covers, we think of it as sports, but it covers all of education. How absolutely crucial it is. Now, and that's a very long way from the idea that women, where we started, which is women shouldn't get overeducated because then they will reduce the number of men they could be married to because they need to be less educated than them. Do you remember this? Right, okay. So, we need to remember how far back we started. And I think even if we take the portion of it that is best known, which is about sports and about strength, I think we need to understand for future purposes how profoundly transformative and revolutionary it is for women to become strong, physically strong. If you think about it anthropologically speaking, rich cultures value thin women, poor cultures value fat women. It's about being rare and therefore being an ornament to the man you're attached to, right? But all male-dominant cultures value weak women. So much so that in kinds of work in the fields or in factories where women have to be strong, the women who are strong are made to conceal it and feel ashamed of it and imitate the weak women of the upper classes. So, it is deep for women to be physically strong and proud of their strength and to have bodies that are instruments, not ornaments. And it is important that men also do the other way and think of their bodies as ornaments as well as instruments, right? They are, right? And besides that, it's a profound health problem for men who, in all the surveys, count themselves as thinner than they really are, whereas women count themselves as fatter than they really are, as more fit than they really are, whereas, they just have the reverse problem. So it is important that men have more realistic assessments of their bodies in order to have better health and survive longer and realize the promise of the women's movement, which has always been to extend men's lifetime. You know that's true? If you think about the forms of illness and death that come from the masculine role, whether it's from violence, guns, speeding, tension-related diseases, whatever it is, if that were eliminated, men would live 4 years longer. So the women's movement has 4 years of extra life to offer men. This is not a bad offer. Then we need to think also about the cost of education. I mean, not are we thinking about the form of education in terms of Title IX, but think about the cost of education. Now, where did we start out? Well, last week I had the great honor and privilege of being at a dinner where Justice Ruth Ginsburg was, and she was talking about her time in law school, in which there were about 6 women in a class of hundreds, and they were taken off by the dean of the law school to a special dinner, and he took them into a room and he said, "Why is it that you are here taking the place of men who should be here?" Okay, that was in the 70s, or in the the beginning of this part of the movement. And now we are present, but it is still true that in many studies it seems that women's intellectual self-esteem goes down with every additional year of education, higher education, because we are too often studying our own absence. Yes, we have women's studies and African American studies and Native American studies, and that helps a lot, but you still have to seek them out. So they are not yet integrated into studies as a whole. So if we are to, we can't be it unless we see it, So if we are to finally integrate all of these forms of what's really remedial studies, African American history, Native American history, women, it's remedial studies. Hello, are we ever going to get to human history? That's the distance that we need to go in the future. On the question of race, we started out, really the women's movement was in part born of the civil rights movement, both because the idea of equality is profoundly contagious, and also to a smaller extent because women inside the civil rights movement and the peace movement, movements we loved and love, still often found themselves in subordinate roles. And it was that realization that even in these idealistic movements, we are still doing the mimeographing. There's a word from the past. How many people remember? And serving coffee and not in the leadership roles. Why don't we know Ella Baker as well as we know Martin Luther King? She was there before. She helped to train him. Anyway, that was sort of where we started, and I think now we understand. I hope we understand in a deep way that that oppressions and birth categories of these kinds are interlocking. They're not two separate things. There's not race and sex over here. What does that do to the majority of women in the world who are women of color? I'm sure it drove us all crazy in the last presidential election to have the constant question of what's more important, sex or race. First of all, there's no competition of tears ever. Tears are tears. And secondly, these two caste systems are profoundly interlinked. You cannot maintain a racial caste system unless you control reproduction, and that means controlling the bodies of women. Therefore, wherever there is a strong racist social system, it is much worse for women. For women of the so-called superior group, because they must be sexually isolated in order to keep the ruling group pure, whatever that means. And for women of color, for women of the so-called inferior group, because they are not restricted and protected in that so-called protected, really imprisoned, they are exploited in order to produce more cheap labor. So I hope that the future is that we understand that there is no such thing as being a feminist without being an anti-racist. And there is no such thing as being anti-racist without also being a feminist. I mean, you know, are you going to leave behind half of the groups that you are trying? These two things absolutely are inextricable and intertwined and cannot possibly be treated separately. I think about language. I mean, intersectionality is a word where we are now, and it's a very, very good and important word, but I'm not sure that it's so understandable to people on the street. What does intersectionality mean? So maybe we should think more about interlocking oppressions, or some way of saying why the sex and race caste systems are intertwined. 6 is just a little thing called sexuality, right? Right. And this, I'm on campuses like this, I'm often asked why it is that the very same groups oppose lesbians and birth control. So I think it's important that we understand that our adversaries are the same for a reason, and sometimes they understand the reason better than we do. Because what the hierarchical, polarized, gender, authoritarian, you know, race matters, class matters folks are thinking, I mean, you know, they didn't invent this, they got born into it too, right? And we all got born into some version of it. But what they are being told, and to some extent, in a minority but still present, as in this election, still saying, is that sexuality is only moral and okay if it can end in conception and the children are born inside a patriarchal marriage. That this is the norm, the ideal, and especially in a religious sense, but also in a political sense now that both birth control and safe and legal abortion are under challenge in this election. I hope that we understand that the idea that human sexuality is only moral and okay if it can end in having children is the reason why women are punished for controlling our own reproductive lives, and also the reason why sexual expression between two members of the same gender, of the same sex, has been so punished. And the reason why the whole idea that sexuality is a continuum, you know, it's not a box, it's a continuum, is also not yet a majority idea. So we have a very long way to go, but I'm so happy that over these 30 or 40 years, we have gone from campuses where gay and lesbian groups were not allowed to meet, even though the religious groups that condemned them were allowed to meet on campus. And every decade we have added more letters. I love that now it's LGBTQA. Is that not great? Allies, A is for allies. And I hope that the future will be sex, an understanding of sex as a natural form of expression. It is a mark of our humanity, like our cerebral cortex and our ability to reason and remember, not just to think, but to think about thinking, that sexuality for human beings is not just a way we procreate if we choose to, but also a way we communicate and express love and caring. In the past, if you weren't a mother, you were unnatural. I mean, I certainly have been called unnatural. How many people here have been called unnatural? Right. And that's why women were, and still are, valued for our youth, because you were valuable in the period of time when you could have children and not afterwards. Now, we've moved forward by decades. Marilyn Monroe felt that her life was over at 30. It was part of the reason for what seems to have been her suicide. Now women are sexual beings into their 40s and 50s, but age is still much more of a limitation for women than for men. And men are also ridiculed still for playing what are perceived of as feminine roles, in fact they are human roles. So I hope that in the future we will understand, as, do you remember, how many people here remember Dorothy Dinnerstein's book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, a great too early feminist book? Go out and get it again, because what she was saying is that to go back to a system, and it is back because original cultures, both men and women raised children, to go back to a system in which men raised children and therefore were allowed to develop their whole human selves. The qualities necessary to raise children are what are called feminine, but everyone possesses them: attention to detail, empathy, patience. You know, women develop our whole selves by being active outside the home. Men develop their whole selves by being inside the home and being in nurturing roles. And she says, Dorothy Dinnerstein says, that this is nothing less than the key to world peace, because the emphasis on masculinity is a major cause of violence in the world, perhaps the major cause. Jeffrey Gore said that the only shared characteristic of society, of violent societies, was polarized sex roles, and the shared characteristic of societies without institutionalized violence was that the gender roles were not polarized. They were porous, they were interchangeable, and everybody was, men did not have to prove their masculinity by control and by violence. In the past, this is 4, incidentally, if you're counting, okay. In the past, the idea was that if women obeyed one man, he would protect her from other men, right? That was where we started. Then we figured out that, wasn't it interesting that the one man by whom she was protected was statistically the man most likely to beat her up or murder her? That for an American woman is least safe in her own home. She is much more likely to be beaten and murdered in her own home than she is in the street. So that is where we are now, and we are still, as we can see in Domestic Violence Month, trying to explain that, for instance, since 9/11, more women, American women, have been murdered by their husbands or boyfriends than the total number of people who were killed in 9/11, plus the Americans killed in Iraq, plus the Americans killed in Afghanistan. More than all of that together is the number of women who have been murdered by their husbands or boyfriends. And this, you know, we are past the point where we say, why doesn't she leave? We understand, you know, but still, we are still in a place where the woman herself leaves home, not the victim has to leave home, not the criminal. We are still really not challenging the role that gender plays. We started out with the private world and the personal world being completely separate from the public one. Then we said, wait a minute, the personal is political, and began to figure out that the division of the private world, the world at home, was a way of keeping that immune to the law. Well, that's a private affair. And without laws against child abuse and domestic abuse and so on. So we have now at least words like domestic violence. I mean, it used to be just called life, you know, when we started, right? Some of us here remember that. But I think in the future, we will understand that, as I was saying, it should be called original violence, because it is the violence that normalizes everything else. The degree of violence in the home is the absolute indicator of violence in public life and institutionalized violence. Second is media. Now, I put it up there because it shapes our dreams. It can make us feel, even if we are in the huge majority of the country, if we don't see ourselves in the media, we feel that it's wrong, and we feel alone and isolated. And why is that? I think it's because the media are the current campfire. You know, for 100,000 years, human beings have been gathered around a campfire telling our stories. That's why our brains are organized by narrative and imagery. But if we are around a campfire and only some people are allowed to tell their stories, and indeed they are allowed to tell our stories, we come to feel wrong and invisible. That is what's happening still in much of the media, and especially as we now have such high technological possibilities that are both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in all the ways you know, but a curse in their spread of hostile images, of racist images, of pornographic images. Pornography, porne means female slavery. That's what it means. Erotica, eros, love, free choice, mutual pleasure is different. So yes, we have got to a place where we understand that rape is not sex, it's violence. But we have not yet got to a place where we know that pornography is not erotica, and that pornography normalizes violence and intertwines it with sex. And finally, number one is whatever is number one for each of you tonight, really. That's the most important number one. But I have put here as number one, normalizing gender, or how shall I say, humanizing gender. Understanding that just as race is a fiction, a total fiction, we all came from Africa, every one of us here came from Africa, and our forebears migrated around the world, and if we went to some part of the world that was cold and had too little sun, we lost the melanin in our skin so we could absorb more vitamin D. And if there's a wonderful documentary called The Journey of Man. Of course, I immediately wanted to know why it was called The Journey of Man, but it's because they followed the male part of the DNA. Anyway, it tracks from the Kwe and the San, the original cultures of Africa around the world, to the Dalits in southern India, to Australia, to the Aboriginal, to the Native Americans here. It shows you, I think it's impossible to see this and remain a racist. And in the same way, gender is completely made up. It changes from one society to the next, and the profound truth is that the individual difference is bigger than the group difference. Just as the individual difference between two members of the same race is much bigger than the differences between two so-called races, the differences between two women here, two men here, are greater than the differences between males and females as groups. And we are just beginning to set ourselves free of these gender roles that are the model of passive and dominant, subject and object, that create a place in our brains so that it normalizes class, it normalizes race, it normalizes all the other notions of being born into a role, or inferior or superior role. And until we recognize ourselves as two things, uniquely human, a unique combination of millennia upon millennia of heredity and environment that could never have happened before in the same way and could never happen again. It's in each one of us. There's a person inside every baby already. Anybody who's ever met a baby knows that there's already a person in there, right? And the differences between two unique individuals are greater than the group differences, and at the same time, and the equal truth is, we are all part of a shared humanity. We are both unique and part of a shared humanity. So I hope that the doing away of the inferior-superior idea that is earliest and most deeply ingrained by gender, just because, not because it's more seriousness, but it's part of everything, and it's what we experience earliest, that finally we will free that uniqueness and have societies like original Native American societies here, many of which didn't even have gender in the language. They didn't have he and she in the Cherokee language. The Native women make jokes about it. You know, what did Columbus call primitive? Equal women. Which is why the Iroquois Confederacy nations were the model for the suffrage movement. Did anybody tell us that? No, but it's true. That we will understand the uniqueness of each of us and the shared humanity of all of us. And there is a book I commend to you as the end of number 1, which is called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson and 4 other scholars, which proves definitively that the single most important indicator, most powerful indicator of violence in a society, militarism in a society, aggression towards other nations, is not poverty or even the presence of democracy. It's not religion. It's not natural resources. It is violence against women, because it is against females, whether it is through infanticide or through domestic violence or whatever it is. Women in the world are no longer the majority because so many have lost their life through femicide, that is, dying only because they were women. So I thought I would, as my last number 1 here, read you the last paragraph of the book. A bird with one broken wing will never soar. We know that. Our species has experienced it for millennia and paid for that sure knowledge with rivers of blood and mountains of needless suffering. The nations of the world must try a different path, a path that we have every reason to believe will lead to greater well-being, prosperity, security, and peace for the entire international system, the path of equality between men and women. We cannot fail. It's time for the bird to finally take wing. Thank you. You can't applaud applaud because I took about 8 minutes more than I was supposed to. Right, okay. And now it's your turn. So how are we going to do this?
Yes. First, as people are coming down to line up, I'd just like to invite you. There are 2 microphones on the floor, and we have a moderator at each microphone. So as folks are coming down, I just want to, again, offer our thanks to you. We have a gift from the president and from the university on behalf of the Women's Center. Thank you for being here, Ms. Steinem.
No,
thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't open it right here.
Yeah, you don't have to open it.
Okay, all right. We hope this is not chocolates because it's this huge. But do you want to say what it is?
If it is a plaque actually recognizing the 40th anniversary of the Women's Center and your
very
contribution to this historic celebration on campus.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll treasure it.
We have several questions. I'm actually going to go sit back and
Okay.
finish that.
Okay, so where are the mics? Oh, here. Okay, so can you all see the mics are here and here? All right, so we'll start on the left. My left.
My question is, Heather and I have 2 young boys who are 7 and 5, and I'm just, your thoughts on how to make sure that with all the stuff in the media and all the influences that can be anti-feminist, how you raise your children to be as inclusive as possible.
Well, you who asked the question are the secret weapon. You know, because boys who see men who are nurturing and who are patient and who care about them and who love them and who listen to them understand that that men can do that. And although the media is alarming, it's still true that all 5 senses example is more powerful than a limited example on the media. And also, I think it helps when we use the media to teach with. We can't forbid kids to see the media. It only makes them, if we forbid them, they just want to see it more, right? But you can use that to teach with and say, see this and see how restricted this is, and why are these people violent, and what else? Well, we just need to think up our own language. What's an example? Chick flicks. Chick flicks are movies that actually have dialogue and people who care about each other. And so, but the inferior thing always requires an adjective. Chick flicks. So we need to invent adjectives for the superior thing, supposedly superior thing, that points out what's wrong with it. So I suggest prick flicks.
Hi, Gloria. My name's Nikki, and I'm a student at Gonzaga University. And unfortunately, we've been having a lot of issues with sexual misconduct, rape, and such things on our campus. I was wondering, in your opinion, what is the best way to combat cultures of rape?
Well, the first and foremost way is to speak it and say what happened. Then we need a process. I'm sure this university has some procedure that is a reasonable and effective procedure so that people can go there with a complaint and see that it is taken seriously and followed through. I know that some campuses have had a hard time with this because they were afraid if they told the truth about what was happening on campus that parents would not send their kids there, and they've tried to conceal it. And so students have sometimes had to put big red X's on the sidewalk, and say, a woman was attacked here, or a woman was raped here, to out it themselves. But I hope and believe that we're beyond that, so that there are empathetic people here in the administration. And actually, you will find interesting allies. In the insurance company that insures this campus might well be an ally because they don't want to be liable, so they help to institute remedial procedures. But is there something, I mean, you're dealing with this, is there something you want to say to this group that they should know?
Yeah, I think that we need to talk more about rape in our society, and we need to not treat it lightly or casually and not brush it under the rug. So I urge you, all of you, to talk about it with the utmost seriousness and recognize that there's people around you who have been raped, and just to be there for them.
Thank you. And you will find other allies. You know, in my mail, the men who understand this the best are men in prison because they have been raped. And they write to me and say, okay, now I understand that body invasion is a whole different level of violence. So, you know, empathy is the most revolutionary emotion. Yeah.
Hi, Gloria. So, understanding that social change can take a long time, I'm wondering if you have any tips or techniques to help deal with, like, activist burnout?
Well, we can share techniques for... In me, speaking for myself, I think burnout was a function of naivete because I thought that surely this thing was so unjust that if you just explained it to people, and so I didn't understand the length of the process. Once we understand the length, I think we pace ourselves better. We take care of ourselves. We support each other. We understand this isn't just something we're going to do flat out for 5 years. It's our lives. And that helps to keep us from burning out. And also, we who have not been taught to take ourselves seriously just need to take care of ourselves. The golden rule is great, and it was written by smart men for men, I think. You know, we should treat other people the way we want to be treated. But women often have to reverse it and treat ourselves as well as we treat other people.
Hi, Gloria. I'd like to just know how you feel about the fact that the ERA never passed and what that says about us as a society.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are not fully part of the Constitution of the United States. And I think that we in the movement who were working on the Equal Rights Amendment, because it was left over from the suffragist era, didn't understand how important it was as a way of redistributing wealth and, you know, creating equality under the law in less than, you know, Reagan was in office at the time, and he said, well, we don't need it because we will fix the laws one at a time. And we figured out at the rate we were going, it would take 485 years. So I think we as a movement were at fault for not understanding the importance of the Equal Rights Amendment and not focusing on it more. But it did teach us very important lessons. For instance, that state legislatures are way less democratic, for the most part, depends on which state, but in general, than Congress. People, because we don't know who our state legislators are. How many people here know who their state legislators are? And so we don't pay attention and police and make our wishes known in general, even as much as we do to the House and the Senate. So it taught us something. We still need the Equal Rights Amendment. We will one day have the Equal Rights Amendment. But as you can see at the moment, it would not get a 2/3 majority in order to get out and into the ratification process again. But we'll get there. And I would like to say, apropos of this election, remember that the real Republican Party, I hope there are many real Republicans here, supported the Equal Rights Amendment long before the Democratic Party did. Just because this Republican Party has been taken over by crazy people. Most of whom used to be Democrats. You know, the 8,000 fundamentalist Baptist churches, most of those folks were Democrats. All the people symbolized by Jesse Helms, you know, who was a Democrat until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, then he fled the Republican Party and took over the Democratic Party. So, you know, I think it's really important that we understand that one of our two great parties is in control of a very small group of extremists, because otherwise you know, when we get angry at one group, we punish that group by going to the other without looking at its content. And I hope that all the real Republicans here will take the party back. So once again, it becomes what it was. I mean, the first Bush supported Planned Parenthood, even Reagan supported immigration rights. You know, I mean, the real Republicans, look at the public opinion polls and take the party back.
Good evening, Ms. Steinem. First and foremost, thank you for being here. It's quite the pleasure and a privilege. My name is Paulette Jordan. I'm running for state representative here in our district. I am curious to know your perspective on women in politics as we move into 2013.
Well, obviously we're stuck at 17% from a national point of view, the number of women in Congress. And we are way down the list of countries in the world. We're in this, I think, the 70th or something in terms of overall political representation. So, and because of what we know, and again, what this wonderful book will explain and document, that not that women and men don't share our humanity, we do, but because of gender roles and because men often feel they have to prove their masculinity, the voting records of men and women, regardless of party, are really quite different. And women are much more likely to vote for domestic spending and health and welfare and education and so on, and men are much more likely to vote for military solutions. So we need to have women in the decision-making structure for very real reasons of content. So let's see, how about 10 or so candidates that could be born this evening? You could decide, women here could decide, well, why not? You know, I'm going to run for county commissioner, I'm going to run for state legislature, I'm going to run for Congress. Hello? Think about it. And if you feel how, you know, how could I do that? I mean, that's so huge. And so just look at the guy who's already there. But it's not about biology. It's about consciousness, right? It's not about getting a job for one woman. It's about making life better for most women and for most men. So I'm not talking about Sarah Palin, right? It's about yeah.
Hi, my name is Lisa Cochran, and I'm very, very proud to have you here, especially since my 14-year-old daughter is accompanying me. And I came to age when the feminist movement was just in its infancy and really making a difference, and it guided me to make some very different decisions in my life and how I wanted to live it and how I wanted things to go. But as I've aged, I find that my sense of power is being diminished by a sense of fear, like retribution, retaliation, the subtle ways that people continue to control others. And how do you overcome that when so much is at stake when you're 60 than when you're 20?
Well, you know, only you know what you're experiencing, so I don't have the chutzpah, as we say in New York, to know exactly if this is helpful or not. But I think the first requirement is to have at least a small group of people who support you, who you meet with once a week or once a month, people who make you feel smart, not dumb, people who share values. Because when we get most scared is when we're isolated and alone and we feel crazy. Then second, if it's any comfort, what the pattern of women's activism, and I don't mean everybody because they're just great young activists, right? But the pattern is that we do tend to get more activist and radical with age. Where the men, and again, I don't mean the men here who are exempt from everything that I'm saying, but men tend to be rebellious in youth and get more conservative with age, and women tend to be conservative in youth and get more radical with age, because men gain power as they age and women lose power as they age, right? Men replace their fathers, women replace their less powerful mothers. So maybe that's a comfort, because I have this great vision of, millions of gray-haired women taking over the earth, or gray hair that doesn't look gray, right? But first, I would say an intimate support group, so you feel confident.
Yeah. I hope to see the gray movement moving us all along in a more humanist direction.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vitika, and I'm an environmental science student. One of my interests for a long time has been the progress and future of women's rights in this increasingly globalized world, whether it's politically, economically, however you want to define it. And I'm just curious about your view on that, or rather, it's easy, I think, for us, in a developed country, to identify issues of violence towards women in other countries, specifically developing countries. But I think it's another issue to actually deal with those issues of interest in an appropriate and culturally sensitive way that doesn't, make us seem like we're imposing upon another country. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, we just need to listen. The point is, all really profound political action comes from the ground up. It's like a tree, doesn't grow from the top down. So we need to listen to women in other countries who are struggling against violence and say, what could we do that would help? In my experience, for instance, the activism around FGM, female genital mutilation, was very much an example, because we waited to write about it until the women in regional health conferences, especially from Africa and the Middle East, had themselves come out against it. And then we supported them because we didn't want to do what missionaries had done, which was to condemn it and make it even more enmeshed in the culture as a form of defiance against the West. So, we just need to listen and say, how can I help, and also remember that it's a two-way street. We have learned just as much in this country from women in India and from women in Egypt and from women, as we have been able to convey. The whole what's called the Grameen Bank movement of small loans and loan circles and so on, which really was invented by a woman named Ela Bhatt in India. But anyway, we learned that here. It's been very successful here as an economic method. So, and also there are many cultures around the world that are still original cultures and that are still matrilineal, as well as in Indian country here, in Kenya, so we can see there more, we can learn. And as long as the relationship is equal and listening and learning, I think we're okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Conor Keating. I'm a English major here, and I was curious, Ms. Steinem, what your views are, understanding that this is an election year, particularly why, and you commented earlier about how sort of wackos have taken over the Republican Party. Why, when in regards to women's health care, why it seems, or at least in my understanding of it, there's been such a big push in Washington to either undo a lot of the progress even made, by laws passed by the parties, on an agreement. Why has there been such a push to undo healthcare, and particularly why have women become the target of that? I mean, is it economic, or is it just simply ridiculousness of
No, it's economic, but it's deeper than economics, actually. And perhaps in my attempt to shorten my list of 10 here, I wasn't saying clearly enough that that women's bodies are the most basic means of production, the means of reproduction. And the need to control reproduction in women's bodies is the very definition of patriarchy, and also one of the pillars of nationalism, the control of territory and the ability to dictate population growth and so on, is, our very, very basic powers. So it is the one issue I know of on which the right wing will vote against their own economic interests. They know very well that not allowing women, poor women, to have the same choice for a safe and legal abortion with government-funded health care is going to cost them a lot more money. And we have the highest rate of unwanted births of any developed country in the world. It's huge, and it's very, it's terrible for women, for kids, for the economy, and yet the desire to control reproduction and take that control out of the hands of women is very, very basic. And it makes sense that it's basic, if you see what I mean. I mean, if you say we're seizing control of the means of reproduction, doesn't that sound radical? It is. And wherever women have been able to control their own physical selves and decide when and whether to have children, population has gone down to something a little over replacement level. But now I think the fear, in addition, has an extra impetus because this country, in about 20 minutes, is no longer going to be a majority white country. For the first time this year, most babies born were babies of color, not white babies. And how great is that? I mean, we're going to be more like the world. I think it's wonderful. It's very, But it has instilled fear into people who, again, through no fault of theirs exactly, got born into this notion that this is of whiteness, of European culture, right. So you will see that the same groups are against safe and legal abortion and health care, contraception, as part of women's health care, as are against immigration. Because they're worried about this shift in the country. And I think the resentment of the fact that we have a proud African-American family in the White House, it needs to be outed. It is present. We can feel it, right? So it is logical that they focus on the issues of reproduction and forbidding that be included in women's health care.
Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Steinem. I just want to tell you, you have been my inspiration, and I am now a law student here at the University of Idaho, so thank you. But my question is, back in the 1970s, when you came out with Miss Magazine and I was an undergraduate, I applied for a job and I was told, we'll interview you, but we're not going to hire you because you're a woman. And now at law school, 40 years later, I see the same thing. There was a student that wore a T-shirt that said, "A woman's place is in the House, in the Senate, in the Oval Office." And the student had crossed out the Senate and the Oval Office. And they posted this on Facebook. A woman's place is in the House. Another law student said to a woman law student, "What are you doing here? You're taking up the place of a man."
That's so interesting. That's exactly what happened to Ruth Ginsburg, and how long ago was that? Right.
And so here, it's so much later, and I felt we would be so much further along. And I wonder, what can we do on a day-to-day basis, and how do you stay positive and not get bitter?
Well, I think at least now, I mean, here's the big news about our progress since the 70s. We know we're not crazy, you know? This is huge. And all the issues we care about have majority support in the public opinion polls. So speak out about it and say to that person who is making these comments, would they say the same thing about race? Would they say the same thing about Jews? Would they say that, you know, because part of the problem is they're just not taking it seriously. But stand up for yourself and make sure you have a group of people who support you. And then it's fun.
It's fun, and thank you very, very much. You are an awesome person. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Darlene Velez, and I'm an undergraduate student at WSU.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't.
I'm sorry, I have a cough. I'm an art history major at WSU, and I want to bring about an issue that has been touched upon twice during your lecture, which is age, and I want to further extend that into ageism and the preconceptions society places on both men and women. Do you think that, what's your take on that, and do you think that that should be addressed?
Wait a minute, are you talking about ageism? I really can't.
Yeah, ageism. And do you think that should be...
ageism?
Yeah.
Right.
How do you think that affects both the feminist movement and as a global movement, both the preconceptions that are placed on men and women?
Yeah. Well, it is, both men and women obviously do experience ageism, but women experience it more because our value is tied to reproduction. So when our reproductive age is over, and men have a reproductive life that's longer, so, you know, it's, although old sperm is the cause of many of the ailments that we used to attribute to women. But anyway, it is the devaluing of age is tied to the overvaluing of reproduction. And if we keep that in mind, we will understand that it doesn't make sense in the current context. And why not reward experience as opposed to penalizing experience? At least now we have laws against age discrimination. They're not easy to bring into play and to stand up for yourself, but it's possible now. We didn't have that before the movement began.
Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Steinem. I was hoping you would just talk a little bit about your thoughts on third-wave feminism, whether about reclaiming traditional women's roles, whether about attitudes towards sex and sexuality, or anything else. I was just really, really curious what your thoughts were about that.
Well, I'm supporting third-wave feminists speaking for themselves. You know, I don't think, I mean, the idea is that we give each other a voice, and it seems to me that, you know, I mean, technically, we're still in the second wave. I mean, the first wave was the suffragist era, and so was it. But people should be able to name themselves. So if there's a third wave and fourth wave, that's fine. And it seems to me that the third wave feminists kind of fall into, in my experience, two groups. One is the daughters of second wave feminists, and the other is young women who were born into non-feminist families who kind of resemble second wave feminists, if you know what I mean. So it isn't, everything is not definable by external eras. It's also the families we came out of and the kind of experience we have. But I'm just so delighted to see all these young women who have such much better shit detectors than I ever had, and who are just out there and who instruct me, you know, who say to me things like, "Why do you smile all the time on television? You're talking about serious things." I said, "Yes, that's true, but I was trained to be a female impersonator. What can I tell you?"
Thank you so much.
Hello, you're my hero. My name's Jay Darian. I'm a computer engineer, and I was pleased that you alluded to something, the idea that men are really stuck. And I grew up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, which is this, you know, dark hole. And I watched the progress of feminism, you know, from women not being able to get their own bank accounts or go to a gynecologist unless they were married and all that sort of stuff, to what we have now, which is better. But I feel like men haven't moved at all. You know, and men have all this stuff, you know, that inculcated violence and homophobia and, you know, routine infant circumcision, all this sort of stuff they got to deal with, which, you know, whatever influence that has. But I feel like men need help from women. Women, it's like, it seems like it's easier for women to enter the workforce than it is for men to leave. I don't know if you feel like that's true. And what help can women offer men in getting out from under it and doing what they need to do to stop being violent jerks, and what can men do to help themselves? I mean, a lot of things men just can't do, it seems. I don't know what, if you have any thoughts on that subject.
Well, you know, I think that, I don't know, it seems like men who are supportive benefit from kind of terminal gratitude from women, you know, because we're so amazed and delighted, you know, to find. But if we are not being supportive in the way that is helpful, then I think men need to tell us that. But in addition to that, men need each other, you know, and the men's movement around the country, and there is a substantial men's movement. First of all, there are many more men raising children and playing a full role at home than there used to be. Is it anything like equal yet? No, but there are many more. And there was a whole Newsweek cover story about two young men who were fighting to have job patterns in which they could be parents to their kids. Men, you know, men are really fighting for that. But I suppose it's always harder for the superior group to give up what is perceived as superior than it is for the not so superior group to move forward. So it seems to me that men need each other, you know, to be to talk about this and figure out what's helpful and what's, you know, in the same way that women need each other, and we want to support you. So if men are not getting the support they need, tell us what you need. And we want this change to happen. You know, we want you to have 4 years of extra life. We want you to have to be close to your children and have that reward. We want you to be able to be expressive and do all the things that are human and not necessarily considered masculine.
Oh, if I could just add, I feel there may be a need for permission from women in order to, you know, stop doing it or start doing it or whatever. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Patton was landing in Morocco. The French, the Vichy French, fought very hard, and he was surprised. Why are they fighting so hard? We're the good guys. We're here to liberate them. Mm-hmm. You know, his guide told him, well, they're fighting because their women haven't slept with them for like the past 3 years because they surrendered and they're ashamed. So they have to show, even if many of them die, that they're macho, and before they let you land.
I just don't believe that.
Well, I don't know. It's an account. It's an historical account of the landing.
I know, but it's a guy saying that the woman wouldn't see them. I bet those women had a totally different reason for not sleeping with.
That the women would do that.
Well, you have permission. Everybody, okay. Let's all the women here say to all the men here in unison. Okay. You have permission. and we'll love you more, right? You don't look convinced. All right, well, if you come up with more of what you need, tell me. But, I mean, we're offering you more life to live. We're offering you, you know. Yeah. Thank you. She's saying it'll be okay. Right?
Gloria, we're going to do one more question from each side. Is that good? Okay.
Hi. I feel like I need to ask permission to call you Gloria. May I call you Gloria? Gloria, I've always admired your audacity, and it's really nice to see you tonight. My question is about the diamond trade. Many women in the world can't begin to think about equality because they're scared for their safety. They're in moral terror, particularly referring to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sierra Leone.
I can't, say you're talking about
I'm
diamonds.
speaking about the diamond trade.
Yeah,
and there's nothing, there's no other substance that I can think of that's consumable that Westerners buy, particularly men buy them for women because of their pulling power, because of their perceived pulling power, their sexuality, whatever. And they're directly responsible for violence, for systematic rape, and for mutilation. And I'm curious, do you think that women can wear diamonds and call themselves feminists?
Well, it's not my judgment to go up to a woman with a diamond and say, you're not a feminist. I mean,
Understood.
you know, it's not my thing to say who is and who isn't. But I do think the more we know about blood diamonds and about two things. One, the diamond market is completely artificial. There would be, they would have virtually no value if all the diamonds that are being kept back by De Beers and others, diamonds have been getting less expensive because of sources in Russia and so on. We have colluded to restrict the sources. We closed a diamond mine in Arkansas just because De Beers wanted us to, right in the middle of apartheid in South Africa. It's very, very political, and there is a very good book about this by Edward Epstein, exposing the artificial nature of the diamond market. And I think once it's knowledge is power, when women understand what diamonds symbolize, the market was created. People in this country were not interested in diamonds. We liked colored stones, that had some life to them. De Beers created an artificial market by giving diamonds to celebrities, putting them in movies. This is what Ed Epstein documents, the ways in which an artificial market was created in this country, a country that didn't like diamonds in the first place. So if we know that, if we know the results of our actions, I think we're much more likely to make a different choice. But without that knowledge, it's out there in the media as a symbol of diamonds are forever. Excuse me?
Thank you.
Look at the marriage rate, diamonds are forever? No, the divorce rate, I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Steinem. My name is Laurel Moore, and I want to reiterate it's thrilling to have you here. I have kind of a two-part question for you. First of all, I am a clothing, textiles, and design major here at UI, essentially a fashion major, and we take classes that show through the history of dress that garments have been used to oppress femininity, sometimes to grotesquely exaggerate our physical attributes that men find attractive. And sometimes you hear things today like, oh, well, she was wearing a short skirt, so she deserved to get raped. So I was curious, especially you being active during the bra burning era, how you thought that, dressing provocatively or androgynously, etc., affects feminism.
Listen, we should be able, everybody should be able to walk nude in the street and be safe. They cannot. The dress question, I think, is more, is it self-expression, which is style, or is it fashion, which is imposition? Are we dressing that way because we want to, or because we think we have to? So there's that at one end of the spectrum, and then there is the fact that in a general anthropological sense, cultures that are restrictive to women tend to make women cover their bodies, and those that are better for women don't, allow the, but the point is not to be forced to reveal your body either. The question is to be able to wear what you want, but certainly not to be told that a criminal act or an act of harassment and so on has been caused by the way the victim dressed. So I always wish that we would replace the word fashion with the word style, because I think style has a feeling of individual expression and doing whatever it is that we feel we want to do. What was the movie in which there was Legally Blonde? That was it. Legally Blonde, which was about, and what's the name of the actress? Reese Witherspoon, right. Because I sat next to her once at lunch, and I've never met her before in my life, and she said, I did that movie for you. I said, really? She said, yes. She said, because I heard you once say we should be able to wear whatever we fucking well please and be safe. And be taken seriously. And I said, yes, and actually that movie has quite a good message.
And the second part of my question was that if you're not leaving directly after your show, my sister and my friend and I all idealize you, and we'd love to invite you to have a glass of wine with us if you're not busy.
I didn't hear the end, but whatever it is was obviously good. Wait a minute.
Oh. We just want to know if you'd want to join us for a glass of wine if you're not busy.
Listen, I would love to join you for a glass of wine, but I got up at 5 this morning to get on the plane, and I have 5 more days to go.
Okay, rain check.
So can I take a rain check
Absolutely.
On the glass of wine and the next time I'm here?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give Gloria Steinem one more round of applause.